Welcome. You're listening to Latin Waves with your hosts, Sylvia and Sylvia Richardson. Latin Waves is more than just hot rhythms. This is a show about community, about creating a culture that is inclusive and based on fairness. Because everyone deserves dignity, respect, and has something to contribute. A new world is possible, and it all starts with us. I am delighted to be joined by Jorge Martí. He's the Secretariat of Hands Up Venezuela. Welcome to our show, Jorge.
It's a pleasure to be with you, as always.
Now, Latin America has been in the front page news, if you like, with mass protests intensifying in Peru. Can you talk a little bit about what led to the protests and why we need to pay attention to this moment in Latin America?
Yes, the immediate reason for all these protests is what happened on the 7th of December. On the 7th of December, the president of Peru, Pedro Castillo, who had been elected in June 2021, made a televised address to the country, and he explained that the Congress had not allowed him to rule the country according to the program he was elected for. And as a result of this, he was using his constitutional powers to dismiss Congress and call for new parliamentary elections within a period of 4 months. And he also announced that he was going to conduct a referendum on the convening of a constituent assembly. He then called on the people to come out on the streets to support him. And then from that point on, events developed very quickly. The dominant capitalist media started to say that this was a coup by Castillo, and they compared it to the coup that Fujimori had carried out in the early 1990s. And then very quickly, most of the members of his own cabinet resigned, came out against him. And then there was a danger that the president was going to be arrested by police and military forces who came out against his decision to disband Congress, despite the fact that this decision was completely democratic. And then he attempted to reach the Mexican embassy to ask for asylum, but he was arrested by his security detail before he could get there. And since that day, he has been in jail. Then, at 5 p.m. the same day, the Congress had a meeting and a session of Congress in which there was a motion to remove President Castillo from power. But this motion was carried out through with many irregularities. The minimum number of votes required was 104. The motion only got 101. The president has the right to defend himself when such a motion is put to Congress. He was not allowed to defend himself. He was in jail at that time. He was in detention. And from that moment on, the Congress took the oath from a new president, who was Dina Boluarte, who had been Castillo's vice president. And basically, this is what happened on the 7th of December. The democratically elected President Castillo, Pedro Castillo, was removed, and a new president was installed in a completely undemocratic manner. And you can only describe that as a coup, basically, the breach of the constitution, breach of the democratic rights. And this is what led to these protests. Millions of people in Peru had voted for Pedro Castillo to be the president. His vote was particularly strong in his home region of Cajamarca in the north, but also in all the poorer, more working class, peasant, indigenous provinces and departments in the south, in the Andean region. And the people basically said, look, we elected this person to be the president, and now this Congress, which is full of thieves and people who are corrupt and political crooks, they now decided to remove the president. We do not accept this. The sovereignty resides in the people. What is the reason why the Congress removed the president? This was a move carried out in conjunction with the U.S. Embassy and all the powers that be in the country. The capitalist media, which is extremely concentrated in a few groups, the economic power, which is controlled by 17 families, and the right wing and so-called left-wing parties alike. What's the reason why they wanted to remove Pedro Castillo? Is because Pedro Castillo represented something different. He came to power at the head of the Peru Libre party, which had been established recently. He is someone who was known for being a trade union leader of the teachers' union, and also coming from a peasant rural background in Cajamarca, in the north of the country. And his main election slogan was "Never again poor people in a rich country." And this slogan really crystallized the very widespread feeling of opposition to the whole of the political and economic establishment in Peru. Peru has had many political crises in the last few years. They've had 6 different presidents. Most of them been indicted for corruption scandals, either in jail. One of them committed suicide when he was investigated for corruption. So this is basically the situation. Is a country which has been dominated by a powerful capitalist oligarchy in conjunction with mining multinationals from Canada, the United States, China, and so on. And it's a very wealthy country. It has many mineral resources, oil, gas. And but however, the majority of the people live in poverty. It has one of the lowest rates of corporation tax anywhere in the world. Extremely deregulated labor market, which basically means that the bosses can do whatever they want with the workers, and conditions of exploitation in the countryside and in the mining areas, which are very dire. And Castillo represented opposition to all of this. It has to be said that once Castillo came to power, he started making concessions to the ruling class. When the army high command did not like his foreign affairs minister, Bejar, he removed him. When the Bosses Confederation, the oligarchy, started protesting against his prime minister, Guido Bellido, he removed him. And so on. He started making all sorts of concessions, moderating his language. He abandoned his peasant hat, which he had worn at the beginning of his presidency, and he adopted a more serious business-like style of dressing. But none of this mattered because the oligarchy couldn't stomach the idea of someone coming from the people, a working class person, in this case a teacher, who was also from a rural background, being the president of the country. This rich oligarchy, capitalist oligarchy in Peru, they think that they have the God-given right to rule the country, and they couldn't accept an outsider being the president, even though he had already made plenty of concessions to him. And that's why they organized the coup. And since then, we've seen mass protests every day, and over 20 people have been killed by police and army repression. This is the origins of these mass protests in Peru against the coup against President Castillo.
I guess I'm disappointed that, as you say, as soon as he got elected, he started to make concessions. But I'm also aware that he's only one person, and it's really difficult to create change, that has been so ingrained in the juridical systems that have been in place from a time of colonial, process, and we're still there. We're still we're using the same colonial tools, the same imperialistic tools that we inherited. And so it's surprising that our, the president that was elected, that came from a peasant background, that represented the poor, cannot get the job done.
On the 15th of December, there was a national general strike that had been building up from the bottom up, from the south, from the north, from the poorer regions, with road blockades and so on. And there was a national general strike. Faced with this situation, with road blockades in many of the provinces, and also the people were using Article 46 of the Peruvian Constitution, which says that the people have the right to rebel, to rise up against the government that's illegitimate. So they were saying they were declaring themselves in state of rebellion. They were blockading the roads, occupying the airports, and taking over infrastructure. So the way that Dina Boluarte responded to this was massive rejection of his presidency. You have to remember that the Congress is extremely discredited. Even before these events, 83% of the population were against Congress, and Congress is the one who's appointed this new president, who is extremely unpopular. So in response to this mass movement, Dina Boluarte declared the state of emergency throughout the country for 30 days, which basically suspends all democratic rights, the right of freedom of movement, the right of assembly, the right of demonstration, and so on. And then brought the army out on the streets. What happened next as a consequence was completely predictable. The army used weapons of war, assault rifles, to face the unarmed demonstrators. And I think that up to this day, 25 people have been killed, the big majority, including 2 underage kids. And the majority of them have died from gunshot wounds fired by the army and the police. This is a massacre. In one day alone, on the 15th of December, in Ayacucho, 9 people were killed, an absolute bloodbath. This is the direct responsibility of Dina Boluarte and all those who organized this coup. The second part is what you were saying about using the same mechanisms and so on. It is true that Pedro Castillo was facing a very difficult situation. He had won the presidential election by a very small margin against Keiko Fujimori, who is the daughter of Fujimori, the person who carried out a coup and ruled as a dictatorship in the 1990s. He's a right-wing demagogue. He's basically the Peruvian equivalent of Donald Trump. Extremely conservative, reactionary, appealing to reactionary ideas and so on. But he won, Pedro Castillo won the election by a very small margin, but he didn't have a parliamentary majority. He had 15 members of parliament from his own party, Peru Libre, and another 5 from another party which was supportive. But this is out of a parliament that has, I think, 140 members of parliament. So his situation was very, very complicated. That has to be said. And at that time, we pointed out that there were only 2 alternatives. One was to appeal to the mass mobilization of the people outside the parliamentary channels in order to overcome this weakness in parliament, to convene a national assembly to discuss a new constitution, was an idea that had been put forward during his campaign, and this will have been a very positive one. The constitution in Peru is now dates from 1993 and was enacted during the Fujimori dictatorship. This was the only option that he had. If he remained within the limits of this parliamentary balance of power, then he was completely cornered. And for one reason or another, I mean, he was extremely isolated in the presidential palace under the pressure of the oligarchy and so on. He made concession after concession. He even traveled to the United States, where he met with the mining chamber of commerce, promised the mining multinationals better conditions, which was the opposite of what he'd said during his election campaign. During the election campaign, he said he wanted to renegotiate the mining contracts so that Peruvian people will benefit more from them and so on. Now, you are completely right. The political structures and institutions of power in Peru, as in most Latin American countries, were created about 200 years ago. In fact, this was the year of that marked 100th centenary of Peru's independence. But all these countries have been ruled by an oligarchy, which inherited the colonial power structures. And this oligarchy is composed of bankers, landowners, mining executives, the owners of the media. And in the case of Peru, you can narrow it down to 17 economic groups, powerful economic groups, which control most of the economy. And they are all linked to different oligarchic families. they have ruled the country forever. Peru has a long revolutionary tradition, and there has been a left-wing military government of Velasco Alvarado. Then there was the big National Constituent Assembly of the 1970s. There's a mass movement for agrarian reform led by Hugo Blanco, peasants' uprisings. But nevertheless, so far they have all ended up in defeat. And in my opinion, until and unless the question of economic power is dealt with, there will be no fundamental change. And for me, this change goes through the expropriation of these 17 groups, national and multinational, which control the economy. There's no reason, as Pedro Castillo correctly said in his election campaign, there's no reason why there should be poor people in a country that's very rich, is very wealthy in all sorts of resources. And the only reason is that this is happening is because these resources are in the hands of a handful of people who are not elected, but in practice, they rule the country. And I will say that the people in Peru are acutely aware of this. Already about 10 years ago, they elected another left-wing president, Humala Ollanta, and this president also made a deal with the oligarchy even before he was sworn in. So what we've seen in the last few days is the emergence of a whole number of organizations in the different provinces and regions, which go by different names. In some places called the Defense Front, in other places called the United Coordination of Struggle. Basically, what is happening is that the people are organizing themselves, and I think that this is the way forward. They're organizing themselves through elected delegates from the different organizations in struggle, trade unions, student organizations, peasant organizations, and so on, in order to coordinate themselves. What I will say is that these demonstrations, what they put on the table is the question of who rules the country. Is it the mass of people who democratically elected the president, or is it the unelected oligarchy who decided to remove him from power? And once this question is posed, it can only be resolved in favor of the oligarchy or in favor of the mass of working people, peasants, and so on. And I will say that all these different organizations of struggles will unite in a National Revolutionary Assembly, and this National Revolutionary Assembly should say, look, we represent the people, we should rule the country. That's the only way. And then through that, you can do away, root and branch, with all these institutions, the judiciary, the army, the Congress, the presidential institution, and so on, which have ensured the rule of the oligarchy for the last 200 years.
You know, when I think about all the ways that peoples are minoritized, you know, we are not the minority, but we become minoritized by all this power being concentrated in the hands of so few, and all these old tools that are continually being used against the people. In the case of the juridical branch of power, you know, laws are always made after the fact to justify the massacres, to justify the dispossession, to justify the displacement of people. It wasn't that long ago, you know, that we had dirty wars in Latin America. It wasn't that long ago that some of the people who are now sitting in the juridical offices of Peru were leading crimes against the population. So what inspires you that we are able to change it, that we can not only see a way out, but actually change this 200-year-old system?
What you say is very true. In fact, the judicial branch of power has played a key role in this coup in Peru. For instance, in the afternoon of December the 7th, after the president had made his speech, his appeal, and he decreed the closing down of Congress, then the state prosecutor, which is supposed to be responding to the presidential office, but the state prosecutor issued an arrest warrant for the president on charges of rebellion. Charges of rebellion were completely false, but nevertheless, he managed to then get a judge to sign it, And then he managed to get the police and the army to execute this arrest warrant. This shows you how, in reality, there is no such thing as independent bourgeois institutions. The so-called separation of powers doesn't really exist. All powers respond to the interest of the capitalist oligarchy. And then, as you just mentioned, there was another judge who, on the 15th, decreed pre-trial detention for another 18 months. This is completely scandalous. I mean, the President Castillo has only been in power for 16 months, so now he's going to be longer in jail than he's been allowed to rule the country or to stay in the presidential office. It's a complete travesty. And as you say, most of these people, the army high command, the judges and so on, they presided over the Fujimori dictatorship when the army carried out a dirty war against peasant communities. And under the excuse of fighting terrorism of the Shining Path guerrilla group, they basically attacked the peasant communities, killed trade union organizers, peasant organizers. Thousands of people were killed in that period. When the Foreign Affairs Minister of Castillo, Héctor Béjar, dared to mention this, which is now been established as a fact by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, when he said that the army had carried out a dirty war against the peasant population, he was then immediately attacked by the army high command, and they put so much pressure on Castillo until he removed his foreign affairs minister just for telling the truth. This is the way things work in Peru, but it is very similar to the way things work in other Latin American countries. What inspires me to think that they can be changed against such powerful forces? Well, I will say that the last 7 days or 10 days of mobilizations in Peru have been really impressive and very inspiring. It shows that when working people start to move, there's no force on earth that can really stop them. And they have a very clear instinct. They not only demonstrated on the streets, they started to organize. They took over and blockaded the main roads in the country. They started to take over critical infrastructure. And I just saw a video yesterday of a peasant indigenous woman from Ayacucho, and she's responding to the speech by the president, Dina Boluarte, which she made on Sunday evening. And this peasant woman, don't know her name, it's not recorded in the video, but she's basically saying we've had enough. We don't want any more oppression, and we are prepared to go to any lengths in order to put an end to this situation, and if they to kill all of us, so be it. This is the real voice of Peruvian workers and peasants who have had enough. I've had enough of this situation where the oligarchy rules. And she said, this woman was also saying, look, we elected our president, and now they're throwing our democratic rights into the dustbin, into the rubbish bin. And we're not going to allow this. And everyone was responding in a very enthusiastic manner. The people came out on the streets on the 15th, despite the fact that there was a state of emergency and people were not supposed to be demonstrating. And they knew that the army was going to be on the streets. They still came out. In Ayacucho, for instance, in the south of the country, there was a big demonstration on the 15th, on the day of the general strike. And the army tried to prevent the demonstrators from reaching the city center, the Plaza de Armas, the main square in Huamanga. But tens of thousands of people, unarmed, with their bare hands, with their bodies, just pushed their way through army blockades and entered into the main square. And they were shouting, we are fighters, we are not terrorists. Because this is the other thing. Because of the history of the Shining Path terrorist organization, now in Peru, the oligarchy is saying that behind these demonstrations is Shining Path. These people are not protesters, that they are terrorists. And this is a very dangerous thing, because in the past, simply the allegation of someone being a terrorist could get you killed by the army straight away. And so this is a very dangerous move by the mass media, by the oligarchy. People were not afraid of this. They They broke through military army lines, and they took over the main square in Huamanga in Ayacucho, and then they moved to take over the airport. This is the spirit, the rebellious spirit of the Peruvian people, which goes back centuries. You can trace it back even to the Tupac Amaru uprising in 1780, when Tupac Amaru and his wife, Bartolina Sisa, led a major uprising against Spanish colonial power. This spirit is still there, and this is what gives, should give us hope, and hope that things can change, that working people, the workers, the peasants, the students, the student youth, they are able and willing to change society in a fundamental way. We don't know how this movement is going to end. Obviously, 25 people have been killed already. There is now a lull in the movement, but the movement will come back with renewed force in the next few hours or in the next few days, because the president is the illegitimate president, Dina Boluarte, is extremely unpopular, has a high degree of disapproval from public opinion. She's already had two ministers have resigned. She's already had to carry out a ministerial reorganization. And it's not very clear that she will last for long. In any case, the people don't want her. And sooner or later, they will be able to remove her from power. That's what's really inspiring the movement of the people in the face of brutal repression.
I guess the last word goes to you. What do you hope to see be the response of communities around Peru and worldwide?
Yes, I think that our duty outside of Peru is to mobilize the maximum support and solidarity with the Peruvian people. This is not just a minor thing. It's not just a protest demonstration. What has happened in Peru is a coup against a democratically elected government who is now in jail. And his only crime was to come from the working class, from a peasant background. That's his only crime. And 25 people have been killed by the army and the police in the repression in this protest against the coup. We should be out on the streets. We had a solidarity picket here in London. We need to mobilize the maximum solidarity. Our class is one class worldwide, the working class. We need to be supporting each other. And in this particular time, we need to be supporting the Peruvian workers and peasants. So we should all rally, because right now, what's happening in Peru is crucial for the future of basic democracy, isn't it? I mean, people have the right to elect their own president, and we should all rally to that cause.
Thank you so much for being with us today. How can people access your work?
Yes, I am the secretary of the Hands of Venezuela campaign. As you have mentioned, Hands of Venezuela can be found on social media and on our website, handsofvenezuela.org. And I encourage everyone to follow news updates on what is happening in Peru and try to organize as much as possible solidarity and support for the Peruvian working people fighting to defend democracy and against this illegitimate government installed by a coup of Dina Boluarte. The main demands of the Peruvian people are freedom for Castillo, Boluarte out, closing down of Congress and new elections and a constituent assembly. These are all basic democratic demands that we can all and should all support.
Thank you again for being with us.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Latin Waves. Latin Waves is an independently produced syndicated radio program made available for free to campus and community radios, and also to the world at latinwavesmedia.com.